President Trump today took part virtually in a summit of Ukraine's top allies known as the Coalition of the Willing. It was hosted in Paris by French President Emmanuel Macron. Joining us now to discuss the key takeaways from that meeting is retired U.S. Marine Colonel Grant Newsham. He's currently a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy. Grant, as always, thank you so much for joining us. Now, during his virtual participation, President Trump told EU leaders that President Putin is capitalizing on their importing of Russian oil. Eurostat reports that in the first quarter of this year, Europe bought $1.7 billion worth of Russian oil, compared to $16.4 billion they bought in the same quarter of 2021. Now, what other sources does the EU have, as in what would it take to cut off that final trickle of Russian oil?
Well, they're going to have to get their own energy house in order. And some countries, for example, have, like the Germans, have shut down their nuclear power plants. They've shut down coal power plants. And once you do that, you've got to get energy from somewhere. And you have other countries in the EU which have similar problems. So they're going to have to buy the energies from someplace. And the United States is rolling in oil, natural gas. No reason they couldn't get it there. But you've got to find alternative sources. But this is the outcome of the Europeans getting into bed with the Russians when it came to their energy sources. And the idea was that would be what they would be buying forever. How short-sighted can you be? So they're going to have to really sort of buckle down to get rid of this last dependency. And also keep in mind that some of the energy that comes into the EU is actually sort of laundered through Turkey and or India. But they're making progress. But when you think about it, the Europeans have been funding Putin's war in Ukraine to some extent. That is just crazy.
Now, since the war began, India and China have ramped up their oil imports from Russia. Would cutting off China from Russian oil have a greater impact on Putin's war effort?
Oh, much greater. And it's not just oil and energy that the Chinese have been buying. It's the other material support, the technological support, the approval they give to the North Koreans to go all out on supporting the Russians. China is really the center point if you're going to go after this. Picking on the Indians is easy, and the Trump administration has been picking on them. Yes, the Indians shouldn't be buying as much from the Russians as they are, but the real problem is China. It's not the Indians. The Indians are our friends, and we shouldn't be driving them away. But China is the key, and you will notice that the Americans really haven't done anything to crack down on the Chinese while they've been leaning on the Indians. And in this meeting, of course, Mr. Trump told the Europeans to get tough on China as well. So hopefully we'll start getting tough on them too.
I want to get to China more, but first, France's Macron said after the summit today that if Russia continues to reject peace talks, there would be new sanctions in coordination with Washington. What could that look like?
Well, it would be a complete sort of cessation of trade and business with Russia. You know, we've been talking about oil and energy, but the Europeans have been buying some other things from the Russians as well. You'd be surprised just how much business does get done. The Americans have done a pretty good job of cutting off most commercial dealings with the Russians. The Europeans still have a long way to go, but you will also note that President Macron, he also said, if the Russians don't do this, the Europeans will. Well, the war's been going on 3 years, and he's talking about something they might do if the Russians don't end the war. You know, it's about time that they move ahead with this.
Now, expanding on your earlier point, President Trump also said there needs to be coordinated economic pressure on China for also assisting Moscow. We just saw Putin in China for the military parade there. Talk to us more about China's role in helping Russia so far.
Sure. Well, almost from the first day of the war, the Chinese have been providing aid to the Russians. The Biden administration actually suppressed that information for a long time. But there were sort of blacked out flights going from China into Russia with some sensitive technologies necessary to let Mr. Putin run his war. And Chinese have provided hardware, technology, dual-use technologies that are essential for operating a modern military. And as I said, they have allowed the North Koreans to go ahead and provide ammunition, artillery shells, and at least 10,000 troops to support the Russians. So Chinese support has been full-throated, and they haven't let up. Also, the drones that get mentioned a lot, that are a big part of the Russian war effort. The Iranians provide a lot of those. The Chinese buy 90% of Iran's oil, or Iran uses that money to build the drones, send them to Russia. There's Chinese components in all of these drones, and now the Chinese are sending fully made drones to Russia, and pretty much saying to the Americans, well, what are you going to do about it? They're not even hiding the support that they've given.
And given all of that, what would economic pressure on China look like, considering that the U.S. hasn't yet struck a trade deal with China?
Well, the first thing you would do is you would pull the People's Bank of China's license to operate in the US dollar system, and then go on to the next 10 Chinese financial institutions. That would cause them some trouble. And then you've got to really cut technology exports to China. You would put a block on any sort of Chinese investment in the United States. You would force divestment of Chinese interests, say land that they own, stocks they've got listed on US exchanges. You just end that. And you would expose Xi Jinping and the top CCP, Chinese Communist Party leadership's obscene wealth, much of it stashed in the United States and Canada, the United Kingdom. Those are some things you have to do, but the idea that somehow you're going to continue normal economic relations with China while China is funding and supporting the Russians, that is illogical. And it's pretty much a guarantee that we're not going to win. And as is widely reported, the Chinese said the other day, well, we're glad to have the Ukraine war going because it distracts the Americans. It doesn't let them focus on Taiwan, on the Western Pacific, or on China. So it's in China's interest to keep the Ukraine war going. So why exactly would we fund this? Why would we give China the wherewithal so that they can then support Putin against the Ukrainians? I think that question pretty much answers itself.
Well, Grant Newsham, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here.